Hi, friends. I just wanted to talk a little bit about something I'm thinking of today. Um, kind of some of the creative blocks that I think can wind up in boredom, in executive dysfunction, where we just feel confused, not sure of how to direct our energy, of how to provide a structure without using shame or harmful ways of enforcing a structure, all the despair, all the things that I think come from long-term boredom. And I think boredom is just not using our creative, or maybe I should say boredom is not using my creative expression because it's something that only I can sense for myself. It has to do with not trying to please people around me, not trying to be like, okay, someone told me to do this, and so therefore I should feel good and happy. But it's based on asking myself, like, what feels right for me? And it's so funny because in so many ways in life, we can, I mean, so many of us grow up in environments and are in workplaces to survive our whole lives where we that's just the normal expected thing that we don't really have an experience of something outside of that, of the the crucialness of listening to ourselves. And that can also, you know, this kind of dissatisfaction and boredom, and anger, frustration, not knowing how to find something meaningful and passionate from our grief derived wisdom and convictions. All of this can lead to things like drugs and addictions and distractions and um, you know, really difficult things. So I think for myself, I'm grateful that in my path, I was a very creative little kid. I drew, I wrote poems, I sang, I played games, and then when I was around like 11 or 12 is when I started to have lots of changes in my life and felt the shame, felt the intense anxiety, panic attacks, and where everything kind of my my trauma origin story, I think was that's when everything became visible on the outside. And then, in my late teens, I chose a different path. I said, I'm following my joy, my passion. I'm listening to that voice within me. I had this anger growing up. In some ways, I'm grateful for the trauma that I had because I responded to it with anger and and I'm kind of glad that I was in these really, like, obviously they're the villain kind of situations where they were, religious. Well, I don't think I should go into it right now, but just religious environments where I was being openly shamed and berated and just totally neglected. And it was very easy for me to understand, like, well, of course I should trust myself. Of course this is really messed up. I never felt like I trusted or believed in what the things people were saying around me. But I did have kind of, you know, the best I could do at the time was an opposite reaction where I started to, um, I felt like I couldn't trust anybody outside of me. And so I had to trust myself entirely, every thought, every feeling, and I had to take it as utter truth without inquiring further or, looking for more information or more options. I didn't have that luxury back then. So anyway, because of this, my creative process for years, for maybe like 6, 7 years, through my late teens, through my like mid 20s, it was steeped in self-trust, follow my desire, follow my pleasure, especially in my early 20s. And unfortunately, it was really not harm reductive. It was lots of risk. It was things that ultimately destroyed my health and my wellness, because all of the things that when people tried to tell me to be differently or try to offer help, they did it in such a shaming way that actually drove me further. They didn't say it in an accessible way. They just said like, you better change so that you can be considered a worthwhile person, not like from a place of love and actual investment and connection with me. So, because of these experiences, my self-trust broke immensely. My self-trust broke immensely, but I also am grateful that I have that experience, in those experiences in my life of what it is like to to use my creative process in a free, feral way, like trusting my thoughts, my feelings, my desire, my pleasure, and understanding how just common sense and essential that is for the functioning of a balanced human who is acting autonomously, who can be intrinsically motivated, who can be sure, and really play like I don't know, a solid role in interpersonal dynamics, shall I say? um, just being able to someone who can care for themselves, who knows how to nurture themselves. Um, so the past, I'm 33 almost. From my mid 20s when my health was extremely low, my mental health, my physical health, and then all of the changes I made gradually in the past, 8 or so years. Um, it's been a really slow process, but now I'm at the place where I can kind of understand like, oh, my creative expression, um, I was judging myself. Google Calendar, but I was judging myself um for what I started to do what I think many people grow up doing all the time is I overcompensated trying to in the past 8 years. I overcompensated trying to be like, okay, I can't trust myself at all. Like I have to like be extremely safe, be extremely hyper analytical, um, and kind of follow the tried and true advices for a while and um, overly so. And I developed from that a real judgment of myself, in a separation from me being able to feel. Part of this is from all the circumstantial trauma, but from being able to actually feel my emotions and bodily sensations and to be like, oh, this is feedback that this doesn't feel good. Because sometimes you get lost because you're in situations where everything feels bad. And so you start to rely on logic. You cut off your feelings for survival. And, um, you know, you start going by logic instead of emotions because emotions are too painful and just not tenable. So, um, yeah, for a while I was, and I think this past year I'm really grateful and proud that I've been coming out of this. But my creative expression was very much based on trying to think of a ideal outcome and then try to force myself to comply with that. Some example that I've seen in the world be like, okay, that should be what I do. That is favorable. That will get me money. That will um, be something that so few people can say anything bad about. And I'm kind of grateful that I'm not able to be those stereotypically high achieving or perfectionistic things because I think it distracts from a real beautiful truth, which is that everybody's what is right for everybody is so individual. You know, what is right for everyone in terms of lifestyle, in terms of just things we enjoy that nurture us, that allow parts of ourselves that we didn't know were even there to come out, the parts of us that can register such deep safety and all the things that come with that, like pleasure, like desire, like just safety and having a wider, more nuanced array of emotions and array of thoughts and feelings that we have when we see something. Like I have a glimpse of this sometimes, glimpses where it's you know, like small things like feeling the beauty of like a leaf on the ground while the sun is shining a certain way, just like these kind of emotional impressions of being alive, that really make the day to day feel rewarding and inherently being alive to be rewarding. The things that a lot of us experience when we are young that we can forget about and forget what that meant and what that signaled and who we are now, that we have to like manually try to get ourselves into that state where we can remember, oh yeah, here's that childlike thing, this way of perceiving the world, this way of structuring our cognitions, um, so that we can perceive the world in a safe, rewarding way that makes us actually want to be alive and feel like it's worth being alive. And it's even more complex when other people come into the picture, but I think that's a part of it for me, is seeing other people as kind of a part of the landscape. Or, you know, when I'm choosing creative self-expression that listens to and follows my emotions and my bodily sensations. Understanding that, you know, whether it's like I'm deciding to like move and dance around instead of washing the dishes for a moment, or I'm deciding to wash the dishes with the nice hot water and instead of moving around because I don't really need it or it doesn't feel attractive to me in the moment, you know, whatever those kind of choices are, I think that at this phase of my life, at least, it's the same thing when it comes to people, what people I allow to be in my energy field. And I think it's similar to, um, you know, I'm grateful for feeling hurt by people because it's an important feedback for me to, especially patterns of hurt, you know, over time. It's important for me to understand if an environment or a person has the same values and capacities as me. It's not a marker of like trying to reject people and call them evil, but it's a matter of self-protection. And I think we all have to do that and be sure um, not to think that it is good or the only way forward to let other people harm us, you know? I'm definitely one of those people who have um, difficulty with people who are just cruel, um, you know, uh, knowing how to yeah, nurture myself in light of that. Um, and anyway, that's kind of getting into a whole different topic. So, but what I'm just thinking about is more so um, just how beautiful it is that I'm able to sometimes, if my mind is in the right place to even remember this whole train of thought that I'm on. But sometimes it's just really beautiful that I can sense the negative things, sense the beautiful things, and trying to brainwash into myself, like go towards the beautiful things, like go towards the light, you know, like when we have wounds and trauma is like an emotional invisible wound, or we might have physical wounds too. But when we have these wounds, like if you have a rotting, maggoty wound, like sorry for that straightforward description, but that is what it can feel like. When you have that, like you're not gonna go like, oh, I want to go out in the sun and get the sunlight like beaming down on this wound for hours, or like I'm not gonna go swim in like a dirty lake. You could say like a lake with bacteria and all kinds of stuff that can get into that wound. It's like it's not appropriate. Like there's not necessarily anything wrong with the lake. Maybe sometimes it's not a lake, it's actually like you have like like a lighter. You're putting a lighter up to your wound and you're trying to tell yourself it's not a lighter, it's just dirty water, but it's actually like no, like that is, I'm speaking metaphorically, right? For like how serious events are in our lives, or how to have that inner sense of, how to take action and protect ourselves. Because, I think that it's a really interesting dynamic when you're trying to build this self-trust back and learn, executive functioning, how to make decisions that are in alignment with your actual needs and your emotional feedback and coupled with your logic, and you're trying to be really careful about things, right? You're trying to not be suppressed or have great harm and suffering, either because other people are controlling you too much, or because you have, or you could say you have too much like wrong structure, or you have too little right structure. Like for me, when for years, like I was not eating and I was like just traveling on farms with lots of people and using substances and risky sex and all these fun things, being homeless, like that, all that crazy stuff. That it like when you're trying to weigh the balance after you have gone through events where you feel like you can't trust yourself, or you've had just great bodily trauma which causes you to be bodily and mental trauma, or intense stress like CPTSD, intense stress over time, where you get the burnout. It's really an interesting process to try to be like, on one hand, there are, there is that part of myself that is trying to be like, it sometimes it can be like a crotchety, like obnoxious voice that is asking me like basically not to trust myself, or asking me to like really investigate, and asking me all of the worries like what if all the bad things, look at all these bad things that could happen, trying to protect me, right? You have that side, and then you have the other side that is like, but there's this pleasure, there's this joy, like a lot of when I was younger, what I was pursuing, it was pleasure and joy, but I didn't have the framework, the capacity to give me a sane frame of reference for what joy and safety could feel like, like my bar was set so low for joy and safety because of the trauma and the neglect and all the things we all go through to some degree when we're young, I just didn't have the capacity, the resources for me to sense things in a more nuanced way, I was kind of numb. I went for like, to feel anything, like it has to be extreme, especially to distract me from the intense anxiety and fear and shame that was so easy for me to feel. Sometimes we can go too extreme, but anyway, when we're trying to listen to these different voices in us, like lately I've been trying to remember that crotchety voice telling me all the fears and the worries, it comes from a place of wisdom. And I don't want to disregard it entirely, I don't want to start telling myself like, oh, that voice is a joy kill. That voice is a blah blah blah. I mean, sometimes it just is. But I don't want that to always be the default way that I respond to that voice, because I'm also like, okay, this voice it has seen some shit. Like this voice is wise. This voice is informed by how hellish life on earth can actually be, I don't know what like what that marker is for you, but for me, like I had a couple years of panic disorder with panic attacks where I think it is probably close to psychosis. I don't exactly know what psychosis is. I was never diagnosed with it, but I think it was more along the lines of psychosis and just intense terror and these experiences that it literally I when I was younger I didn't know it was possible to feel that way. And it's literally like, oh, like hell is a place on earth, heaven is a place on earth, you know? Kind of like a bad trip, a bad drug trip, but you're awake, you're alive, you can't stop it, you're in it, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm pretty sure it was, stress and chemical induced psychosis, but you know, we really like I don't know what that thing is for you that you want to avoid that, but I know for me, I'm just trying to find this balance now of how to be honoring that voice in me, that fear that is coming from a place of wisdom or trauma sometimes it could be, um and just asking myself like, okay, I hear you voice, like thank you for this information. Let's investigate it. What is the real danger here, And I can like look at cognitive distortions, like look up the 12 distortions with CBT, the 12 cognitive distortions. I can use those distortions, um, and I can, you know, put things into perspective and realize that sometimes my thoughts are really perfectionistic. My thoughts can be really perfectionistic sometimes, and they can be basically asking me to have a life that is impossible for me to have in the moment, you know? And it's something that I'm like, this is my goal that I want to have one day, but then I fail to honor my blood, sweat, and tears, my ancestors' blood, sweat, and tears, everybody around me's blood, sweat, and tears for making the beautiful of what is real possible, instead of some idealized fantasy of what it should look like for me to be happy and um at peace and secure in the moment. um and that goes back to creative expression, that a lot of times these are all the questions and the kind of the backstory that is in my mind when I'm just trying to make these simple everyday, like, how should I use my creative energy? How not to be bored? How to try to live in line with my values? How to try to extend the reaches of my authentic expression and authentic community belonging? These are all the questions, um, and the blocks that I have to processing um, my decision making. But I know that I kind of have a magnifying glass on this whole thing during this time of my life, but it's not always going to be like that. And I'm grateful for this time to be able to really be feeling into these finer points so that it's making me capable to have this cognitive restructuring going on. Um, but yeah, I think that it's also is important to remember, like, yeah, we should go after joy, pleasure, desire, feeling good. But just remembering my younger self, like, I think I would be like, okay, what are those harm reductive things that you can do? And even now, I ask myself that, like, what are the harm reductive things? Like, something's not actually my joy, pleasure, bliss if I don't fully analyze the whole constellation of arrangements around it and I don't look at the negatives. I think it's always essential to do a pro negative or pros and cons list before making a decision, because especially a decision that is like a habit, a pattern, more like a way of life, because everything has cons to it. That's just how our minds work. We're always going to see potential cons. We're always going to feel cons. We can make a pros and a cons list, and we have to update it as we're actually living the experience, because our pros and our cons are informed by our emotions, and we can only feel our emotions when we're in the experience, compared to if we're just sitting outside imagining what could happen. So, yeah, for me, harm reductive, like expressing myself creatively with harm reduction, that looks like when I'm like, oh, I'm finding joy through writing, listening to music and writing fiction. So when I do that, I'll be like, okay, that's cool, good, I love it. But also remembering, I gotta get up, I gotta drink water, I gotta drink water, I gotta eat some food. I have to, have some kind of list that reminds me of like my bigger picture maintenance activities of just making sure I'm attending to all the responsibilities in my life. And I think it's essential and beautiful to get sucked into that joy, to that desire, that safe world where we can have creative expression that's really authentic to us, and it feels like we're transported to another universe. But if that isn't balanced with self-directed structure, or at least self-designated, like self-determined structure, then our passion can unfortunately appear to be like our downfall, because we feel like it's a distraction, we're getting sucked into it. But you know it can kind of lose a place of balance in our lives. So for me, harm reduction during my creative expression is looking like remembering to do other stuff throughout the day. And yeah, there's a lot of other things I could say on this topic, but I guess in general, I just wanted to say, like, all of this is very energy intensive, you know, to be emotionally considering what is the right decision to make, and analyzing. And I don't think this way of processing is meant to be a way of life. I know it can feel really good sometimes. Like, it feels good for me sometimes when I feel like, oh, I'm on top of the world. My mind is flying free. I mean, I'm on top of things. Everything looks so crystal clear. But the truth is, like, for a long-term way of life, like, we go through phases. We go through energy cycles where, like, we have less energy. Our minds aren't way up there. And we need to, I say I need to live a way of life to where I have that safe perspective, that safe way of, I was gonna say cognating. No, that safe way of cognitively structuring and building a narrative around and interpreting myself in relation to my environment, to determining my actions to take, my thoughts and emotions to co-sign, or what to do once I have a thought or emotion. There has to be simple ways of doing it. There has to be like when I'm foggy minded, how am I gonna what's the automatic thing I can go to? The Clip Notes version to make sure that I'm safe, that I can keep myself safe, and I can be acting in alignment with my higher, my higher energy self, like the values and everything that I double check and determine is right for me when I'm in that uppity kind of mood. Making sure that when I'm really tired or confused or whatever it might be, I can I can be acting according to my values and in a different mode that honors different needs that I might have, but making sure I can still feel safe and actually be safe, as safe as possible, carving out new opportunities, new accessible accessible, compatible, sustainable opportunities for myself through my decision making process, even when I'm in a different mode. So I think especially when this comes to interacting with other people, I think sometimes, I know for myself, I've definitely seen this in my life where I have taken on way too much emotional labor and a burden of analyzing, intellectualizing things in order to try to manage, control, stay safe from the damaging things that a person does, the things that hurt me, the things that drain me, the thing, and um, it's, well, the things that are hurtful and damaging, I think, is communication that uses fear, terror, shame, punishment, those kinds of things. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about interpersonal connections where the sense is just of, you know, this habitual form of using violence, forms of violence to manage to communicate that we see it in the world like as kind of a norm, and it's scary when you realize how normal it is. Um, and anyway, um, yeah, it's very energy intensive to try to manage ourselves, manage other people, whether we're managing an actual damaging person external to us, or we're managing that internalized oppressor that is damaging us. It's very energy intensive, so I don't know. I'm trying to just figure out that kind of radical self-acceptance part. I think the dog farted, but literally, but literally, I'm just trying to figure out what is that radical self-acceptance part of me that can keep myself safe and on the right path, even when I'm tired, even when things feel confusing and I can't think too well and I have lots of emotions. I think it's beautiful to keep what I was talking about the wounds earlier, keep those wounds sheltered. Keep those wounds sheltered so they can heal. To listen to our emotions, and a part of that for me lately is I've been trying to be less perfectionistic towards myself, have different expectations for myself, have a different standard of success and beauty for myself so that it's something that I can actually be like, oh, I inhabit this now. And so that it is well, anyway, my mind is kind of all over the place right now. So I'm not if I was writing, I'd be able to look up and see what I was just writing and then follow on, but I don't remember what I was talking about. Anyway, take care. Bye.